Okay, welcome to ch4 Church History. Welcome to next bit of thought that I was thinking, courtesy of Stanley's book that we continue with. What we're looking here is compare and contrast the persecution with indifference as a method, a model for how to not be Christians, how to stay away from Christianity, how to persecute Christians. So we're looking at persecution, and we're going to look at it particularly focusing on France and the Soviet Union and their different approaches and models, and the implication that came from that. And Stanley has an interesting implication, conclusion, if you like. I'll just give it to you now. Spoiler alert: indifference is more powerful than persecution. That's going to be where he ends up concluding. But he also has some interesting views on what it means to, well, not what it means to be secular. He doesn't unpack what it means to be secular. That would have been quite interesting. But he does try to unpack whether secular might actually be a good thing, whether there might be some good to be found as we moving into the 21st century, as we review what it means to be Christian and missional in our settings. So for the 1960s, 1970s, I'm reading top of page 28 of my lecture notes. It seems that religion is on the way out. Secularization is the way forward. But really, evidently by now, we're able to say, well, that's not really the case. There does seem to be a flourishing of global religions and spirituality. So you have this quote from Steve Bruce, that he foresaw that religion should gradually lose its social significance, except where it finds work to do other than relating individuals to the supernatural. So what does that mean? Like food banks and pastoral work, but just no mystery. None of the romanticism that we saw from Newman and the Tractarians, for example. None of the power that we saw in the previous chapter when we were looking at the power of the word and the prophet in Africa and in Melanesia, where we saw that. No, none of that sort of nonsense. So Knoll's Turning Points book, who picks up on the radical de-Christianization of France starting in the 1790s, where it was quite particularly, there was a very direct persecution of the Roman Catholic Church, widened then more to Christianity, more generally speaking. But you have to bear in mind that its leaders were generally not atheists. They were generally deists, trying hard to work out what it means to believe in this modern day and age and situation. So they were trying to work out what sounds like a clever way of having faith in the midst of this. Both Russian and French version of secularism objected to the hierarchicalism that was intrinsic in the Catholic and Orthodox tradition. So not keen on hierarchy. I think some of us could have sympathies with that. Both suspected Christians of being of dubious loyalty to the nation. So this is a question that we've seen since in England, since Elizabethan England. You know, where do Roman Catholics fit in all this? Is there first allegiance to the Pope in Rome, or is it to Queen Elizabeth I? And so we've seen this for some time as a conflict. Here it is in a different form in France and in Russia. Where does your true loyalty lie? Soviet Russia, we see a militant antagonism at the very beginning against the very existence of Christianity, although we see it move more into a controlling element, whether or not there's something that we can do here that controls the church. I think to some extent Napoleon does that post-French Revolution, and then when Emperor Napoleon comes in, he then does pick up the church and starts to see whether or not it can't be used as a useful glue for society, something like that. So here we are, 4.2 en France, and we have the 1905 law of separation. And this seems to assume that the state had rightful ownership of churches and cathedrals built before the Concordat of 1801. It was originally proposed that the associations culturelles, you can tell I'm not really a French speaker, sorry, would have to pay rent to the authorities for their use of church buildings. Although in the event it was agreed that they could do so without rent. And so parish priests find themselves as caretakers. So this is my understanding, but I'd love somebody to help me discover if this is true or challenge it. So that the terrible destruction of the cathedral in Paris, and suddenly the Notre Dame, and how the government stepped up to say, oh, yes, we will pay for this. And it looks terrifically magnanimous. It wasn't magnanimous at all. They stole the churches off the church in the first place, and then and then let priests have it rent free, but it's their churches. And so this is not magnanimous government giving church some money. This is stolen church property that the state did from back then. I'd love somebody to correct me on that. So we come through First World War, Second World War. Here, I'm just wanting to pick up on a couple of things here, is the element of coming together. The Catholics, the socialists, the communists having to work together to defeat the Nazis. Bit of a skip as I jump now to 1981. But here the state trying to push the Catholics out of schools and keep them. They'd already done quite a lot of work on this, but here, 1981, there's a sort of a fresh zeal for it. We find men decreasingly keen. That's an odd phrase. I wonder why I wrote that. On confession, especially as we see the Roman Catholic Church not moving over contraceptive advice. Meanwhile, we see women drawn to a compassionate Christian society that is offering an alternative life to the inescapably masculine creed of the Third Republic. Which is a quote from Stanley, page 88. The Catholic Church and its religious orders provided avenues for women to exercise both service and leadership in a professedly secular society that denied them such opportunities. So you've got a church there that's got giving women more opportunities than the secular, well, not really great secular society that seems to be not so keen on equality. So you have even Paris saw a gradual rise in Easter communions between 1909 and 1954. But then you do see a falling off in terms of attendance at confession, and in terms of baptism, we see that falling away. To some extent, is this down to the immovability of the Catholics over contraception in the final tailing off? Let's for a moment look at Russia. Do you see how in most of these chapters what Stanley is doing is he takes two quite different countries and compares and contrasts the same sort of theme. So we looked at nationalism before, and this time we're looking at persecution. So here you've got Grigory Rasputin. This is some stuff here from Diarmaid MacCulloch, because I felt the need to bring him in, not obviously relevant, but important in our church history. And you've got the Russian church now. Suddenly, for a moment there, it was the Third Rome. After the fall of Byzantium, there it is. It has its proud moment, but now it is struggling the same as the Byzantine Church did after the Turkish invasion. And that I've nicked there from Gonzalez Gutierrez, page 307. So what we're looking at then is the Russian Revolution, 1917. This is where it starts. And it dropped any pretense of deference to Christianity, and it treated the institution, the leaders of the Orthodox Church, as enemies of the people. So nice and clear. Come the Second World War, the church raised 300 million rubles for the war effort. So the church is making a big effort to counter this enemies of the state by demonstrating they're part of the family, the community, the state. We are good, loyal, I was going to say nationalists, is that quite the right word? But we're good members of our nation. And so there's some stuff here about churches together, sort of thing. This is how the state begins to see if maybe the Russian Orthodox Church couldn't be a tool of the state, a useful product, and we could send them off to the World Council of Churches. Not least because we see the World Council of Churches as being a tool of American imperialism. So let's fill our churches with spies so that they can go off and be part of those religious delegations. So the end result, then, there's some stuff here about Protestants, which I think is important. But I'm looking at the end result. By 1980, there's evidence of religious revival, a resurgence of Orthodox national piety. And there's a suggestion of how it contributed to perestroika and the collapse of the Soviet Union. The impotence, then, 4.4, impotence of the secular state. In France and Russia, you've got a concerted campaign to reduce the role of the church. The French approach, the confiscation of property, the pushing of the church out of education, it had a catastrophic effect. But vocation and faith was still there, and the church finds itself at some stage or other being more inclusive than the secular society. But its inability to move, perhaps over what was it, over sex, means that it ends up being more isolated. And so you have this horrible quote, the real blow, from page 100 of Stanley's book, page 34 of my notes. France, since the late 1960s, has indeed demonstrated the triumph of religious indifference rather than of atheism. Ooh, that's got to hurt. That's got to hurt. So I invite you to discuss. Churches ultimately have more to fear from cultural than political varieties of the secular. But he leaves us with this issue, this question: does secularism have to be an enemy of Christian faith in the way that Nazism, Soviet communism were enemies? Or does it offer a chance to remold Christianity as it has been remolded so often before? Can the many faces of Christianity find a message which will remake religion for a society that has decided to do without it? I do commend to you the film The Two Popes. Do have a watch of that. Not directly relevant to France and Russia, because the bit that I found very moving was the stuff to do with persecution in Argentina, and so it's that part before Pope Francis becomes Pope in his earlier career as a priest. Thank you for this bit.